Breaking the cycle to step forward. Authentic conversations from lived experience and a professional perspective in overcoming abuse with Chris Tuck and Beverley Ann.
Hi everyone, welcome to Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast number 33, and we are going to be speaking about shame. But first of all, my name is Chris and I'm with my co-host, or the first host,
Beverley Ann.
I thought I'd introduce it differently, Bev, you know, why not?
Thank you. No, that was lovely. And we co-host. We do this between us.
We do. So we're speaking about shame, which can often be a very deep and disturbing, in inverted commas, for some people, because they feel it deep and they don't know how to express it. They don't know how to deal with it, get over it. So what does that word shame bring up for you?
Well, for me, shame, it is very, very deep. When I think back to personal experience, you know, we're taking on the shame of other people's actions and we internalize it. So for me, it was about wearing a mask, coping, making sure that everything was in place and everything was perfect, because what I didn't want to happen is people to see inside me, because they see this big dark hole, and that's the only way I can physically describe shame to me. That fear of not being myself. So as people can see if they're watching the videos, sometimes we turn up with makeup on, sometimes we don't. There was no way I would have turned up with no makeup on years ago, because that was part of my mask.
And what did you feel or think that people were seeing? What was your perception?
Well, some of this comes from the messages we hear around us. So, you know, from the media and perception. But for me, being a survivor of abuse, particularly sexual abuse, it was like, if I share that, how will people judge me? So the shame really comes into, you know, seeps into all different parts of life, and we're going to continue to share some other parts. But I really felt that, you know, if they knew, and I wanted to make myself as small as possible. I didn't want to be able to stand up and to think, oh, if I speak up, you know, people are going to know what I'm really like. That's how much the shame affected me in every part of the aspect of life.
Of your life, yeah.
Yeah.
And I can concur with that. My first feelings of feeling shame was when people brought it to my attention, because before they brought it to my attention, I didn't know any different. So, for example, turning up to school with holes in my shoes and being called flea bag, being told that I smell. When those differences are brought to your attention by children who are just acting like children, but to me being very cruel to me, that is when I felt the shame burn really deep. And as a child, obviously my real dad, who perpetrated sexual offences against some of my siblings, I'll leave it there, and was convicted of that, him being called out in the playground, oh, your dad is a paedophile. I never knew what that meant, but it didn't sound nice. And when I went back home and asked what did that actually mean, and I got told he did these things and it means that, I just felt the shame burn into my soul, you know.
Yeah.
And I felt judged every single day on the acts that someone else had done, i.e. my dad. And even if he didn't perpetrate anything towards me, I suffered other abuse at the hands of other people. I still carried his actions, that shame, for a lifetime, until, like we're going to talk about later, is how do we put that shame down, but we're not touching on that yet. Yeah. So it is a deep-rooted, deep-seated feeling, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We talk about conscious and subconscious. It is really deep in our subconscious. And that's where some of the fear is perpetuated from as well. Because, with this shame, on top of that is the fear around, are we safe? But not only that, fear, are we going to be called out? Not just by the abuser, but other people, because we're holding on to it. And I want to also distinguish the difference between shame and guilt.
Okay.
Guilt is about actions that we have done. So, for instance,
so something we've done ourselves.
Yeah. So, we've broken something by accident. We feel guilty for that. Okay?
Especially if we cover that up.
Yeah. So that's where guilt comes from. But as young children, we don't really know the difference between shame and guilt, and it becomes so entwined.
Right.
And then as we become adults and we haven't spoken, and then we look back, we start to think, well, why didn't we do that? Why didn't we speak out when we were younger? And we hear that all the time. Why didn't you speak out? So then we start to feel guilt on top of the shame.
Right. Okay. But I want to go back to that point, and we've touched upon it before. Like everything, we always touch upon it and come back at it from a different angle. Why didn't you speak up? It's not up to the child to speak up, Pete. Be aware of that. Educate yourself on that. It's not up to the child. Yeah, they've got enough to contend with. But if that child does speak up, verbally, non-verbally, bloody well listen and bloody well do something about it, please.
Absolutely, because it takes, the courage it takes. I can't, I admire any child, any young person, and any adult that finds that courage. We both know what it's like to feel like that. And I don't mind educating people, I really don't, but I do find it frustrating when you keep saying the same thing. And we see it all the time, and this is where we victim blame. Yeah. Why didn't you speak out? Yeah. You should have done this. You should have done that. And we're both very passionate on that.
Yeah. And Beverley, I know this is off topic, but the fact of speaking up and disclosing, I don't know about you, but there was so many times I went to do it and then I pulled back for fear of the consequences. And then another situation would appear and you think, oh, this time I'm going to do it. This time I'm going to do it. And it's right there. And then something else happens and you pull back. So many times a child or young person will try and tell, but the circumstances, something will happen and they will just switch and go, actually, it's not safe for me to do that at the moment. And whilst you was explaining that just then, my spine went cold and tingly because I just threw myself back to when I did disclose or tried to disclose, and the amount of times I tried to speak out and couldn't. And when I did, and I wasn't listened to, or I was, as you said, like victim blamed, oh, that couldn't possibly have happened. Like you go back into your shell and you're like, it really silences you.
But what it also does, so you're not off topic, because nothing is off topic, because it all comes back. And that's why we say about breaking the cycle, because can you see how that embeds the shame again even more? So it's another layer. It's embedding the shame. I must be a liar. We know we're not. We know that.
Yeah.
But so we take it on, we internalize it.
Absolutely.
Also, you've got to remember, if there's abuse going on sexually, there could also be, there's definitely emotional abuse going on, but it could also be physical abuse. So you're not in a safe environment. Without the physical abuse, you're not in a safe environment. So you are worried about the consequences. And I did it even without, I did it then, I flinched then, because that, and I will also be honest to say that's an area that I've really had to work on myself at times. If there's in a group environment, and I remember the teacher, and even if it happens now, if someone says, oh, who's done this? I'm like, well, I haven't, but I'm taking on, you know, and then I have to really, you know, I feel what's happening, and I have to really step back and think, no, that's not being directed at me.
Yeah. So going back to shame and what it means for me, it's a feeling of less than.
Yes.
So in order to make yourself as equal to your perception to other people, as you said, there's the mask that goes on. There's the trying to be perfect, overdoing all of the time, constantly thinking, and the fatigue that comes from that is just so immense. So when you can take that mask off, speak your truth, be authentically you, it's just so freeing, isn't it?
It is, but there's quite a few steps before that. So I love that word, as you said, about, you know, what shame means to you, because for me it was unworthy.
Yeah.
And
feeling
we all
less
have
than. Yeah.
less than, unworthy, you know, even failure. So hence trying to do everything to the absolute best level that you can, you know. And when we see also what happens is, so we're learning, especially in childhood, in a young adult, in a vulnerable, and as vulnerable adults, we then enter in relationships. Now we know we want to change things, but there's some things instinctively we don't know how to change. So if we're being controlled, isn't that a sign of love? Isn't that a sign that they want us? You know, so we tend to go into abusive relationships, because what does a relationship look like?
Yeah.
As a parent, you know, again, I'm going to say something, we've touched on this before, but as a parent, I mean, I remember when you know, the thought of becoming a mum, the scary part with me was, how can I protect my children from the shame that I'm feeling myself? What if I let them down?
Wow, it's deep, isn't it? It really seeps into every corner of your life, doesn't it? This feeling of shame.
Absolutely.
I've heard it from not only my sister but other survivors that I've come across. But my sister Diane, she explains it as being a piece of rock, and you know the writing that goes through the rock. So it's inherent in the rock. And she says that's what the shame is. It's inherent in me. When people look at me, this is what she says, when people look at me, I feel that they are seeing what's happened to me and that it was all my fault. And that is just so, oh my God, oh wow, how deep and how utterly sad, and how dare perpetrators put that kind of deep-seated horrible feelings into people, because that's what it creates. This act of sexual abuse, this crime that is committed against children, that is how deep it can seep. And
Absolutely.
It's not right, Bev.
Absolutely. And that's why, you know, last week's podcast was very much talking about, you know, oh, it happened a long time ago, why can't you stop talking about it? Well, actually, I'm going to say the other thing. The best friend of shame is silence.
Yeah.
Because the longer or the more silence there is around it, with ourselves, with people around us, the more the shame is. It feeds shame.
Yeah, it does feed it. You're right. And the fact that you want to be able to speak about it, not like just willy-nilly, but that there might be a need to speak about it because how you're feeling. If the people around you don't acknowledge it, don't want to speak about it for whatever reason, that just adds more layers to how you're feeling.
And that's when it becomes more isolating as well, because we internalize it, we isolate it. We look at other people and we think, well, you're not the same. It can't have happened to you because no one's talking about it. And that's why having this conversation is really important, because there'll be someone listening who's thinking, absolutely, I feel the same, but I don't know what to say. And as we say, it's not necessarily finding the words, because finding the words, first of all, is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to find a way to communicate with yourself how you feel. Because when we have shame and we're pushing down our feelings and our emotions, you know, that's when we look at how do we shut our emotions off and continue shutting them off? You know, what we're using. Are we using working? Are we using alcohol? Are we using drugs? Are we self-harming in a way, in lots of different ways, because we feel we're not worthy. We want to transfer that pain, but we're not worthy. So what does it matter if I don't look after myself? You talk about self-care, but, you know, with all the shame, how am I going to look after myself?
Yeah.
You know.
This brings me back to the last one where we said, you know, leave it in the past. And some people, individuals, not being able to do that. And I can really get now from this conversation where it is about the shame that's making them feel unworthy. And as you've just said, not being able to, or not caring enough about themselves because of what they've gone through, not caring for themselves. And why does it matter, you know? We knew this was going to get deep, didn't we?
We did, but as always, and we need to acknowledge that it gets deep because it's an important part. You know, there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if we don't bring it out and shine a light on it, how are we going to move forward? And that's the important part. We've been able to acknowledge, and for anyone who's listening, please think of your self-care. And now we're going to think about, how do we move forward? How do we let go of that shame?
Yeah, exactly. Now, for me, Bev, I let go of the shame of what my dad did. Not straight away, actually, not for decades, because what perpetrated the shame for me was all of the myths that surround sexual abuse. And one of them is, if you have been abused, you will become an abuser, which obviously is an absolute 100% myth. But also for me, it was like, well, your dad's an abuser, so that means that you are by association. And I'm like, that was abhorrent to me. Obviously, as you can imagine, but it was just like, if anything, I was more against making sure that everything that I did with my children was above and beyond. You know, just, I wouldn't even change a nappy by myself. I would do it in front of somebody else, for example, in the early days, just so that I could prove not only to myself subconsciously that I wasn't an abuser. And that time that I've shared in the book, and I've shared many times with people, but I still feel shame about this, actually. Maybe I should work on this in therapy. The time that Ben, who's now 25, bless him, when he was a baby and he did that really disgusting, dirty nappy, as they all do, where it was all up his belly, all up his back, and God knows everywhere else. I literally had to put him in the bath, clean him all down, but then had to spend more time on him than usual. And I just thought, I had this scary thought go through my head, oh my God, anyone watching now would probably think you're abusing him because you've spent too long cleaning him. I mean, where did that thought come from? Why did it come to me? And that's when I had my first sort of like real wobble, and I ended up down the GP saying, I'm not an abuser, am I? I had to go there for clarification, and I was distraught. And it was like, whatever made you think like that? And I just explained where my thought process had been going since I'd had him, like given birth to him. And he went, from what you've told me and what you've gone through as a child and adolescent yourself, and you've not dealt with any of this, it's come back at you full wham. And basically you are being triggered big time, and no, you are not an abuser. Get that out of your head. And it took that GP, that professional, to say that to me. I mean, I knew that already. I knew that, but that shame and that guilt that I've been carrying around for decades just like came at me, and I needed that acknowledgement from a professional to make me think, oh, all right, yeah, I'm just being a good mum.
Yeah. And one thing I want to make clear as well is we're talking about sexual abuse here,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's not even through abuse. It's perceived, so excuse me, clearing my throat there. So it's an action that's done sometimes with the best intentions. And what I'm going to relate to here, because it's one of those areas that we don't talk about, but for girls, particularly, when they're medically examined internally at a young age, now it may not be an abusive act. It may be done for a medical reason, out of care, because there's concern about abuse. But when there's an internal carried out on a young girl, and we're talking even from a very young child, even through teenage, you know, that can also have similar effects of shame.
Yeah, that happened to me. As you know, I've shared that with you before. At the age of 9, that happened to me.
Yeah. So it perpetuates in different ways. So that, you know, it's not necessarily abuse as in sexual abuse.
No.
And I want to make that clear, because when I've had a couple of clients in the past that have spoken about this, and they've taken the shame on it, and then it's also carried on to their life. And then they felt even more shameful, because then they said, but I haven't been abused. Why do I feel like this? So I want to make that very, very clear to anyone who's listening.
Yeah. So going back to that question then, how do we break the shame? For me, long story short, I woke up one day and thought, hang on a minute, he did that. It wasn't me. Just because we're related doesn't mean a thing. I would never, ever touch a child sexually inappropriately. I would go to my deathbed protecting a child from that, because I know what it feels like. So why am I holding on to his shame? And now when I publicly speak about it, I go, yeah, my dad's a paedophile. And it doesn't have an impact on me, as I don't carry the shame of what he's done, because he might be my biological father, but I have nothing to do with him. I'm not responsible for his actions. I'm responsible for me and my actions, and that is it. So
Absolutely.
That's how I broke it. What about you?
Again, mine was quite long. So the real shame, first of all, came up was, as I mentioned, when I was 14, 15, just around the time. And in my second children's home, Auntie Helen was being very honest with me and telling me about the difference between sex and making love, and that you have a choice and self-respect. When I realised what had been happening, that was my huge trigger. And that's when I was just engulfed by shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time my dad tried, I just said no very quietly, and he stopped. And that for me meant I carried the shame. So why didn't I do that when I was younger? And it was only when I had my children and I started counselling, because they were triggering, and that's very common. So, you know, as much as I love my children, they were mirroring what I hadn't had or how young I was. And so I started counselling, and it was only then I remember walking in one day and lots of toys being around the room, and it was near to Christmas, and I'd been Christmas shopping. I couldn't sit down, and it was only then when she said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Why am I here? I'm an adult. I'm taking this time off a child that really needs to speak to you." And she said, "But you need to speak to me." And I said, "No, I don't want to." It was the toys. And I said, "I don't want to take this time away from another child." And I said, I was an adult. I was fine. I could sort myself out. And I just couldn't speak. And it was only when she was able to say, "So how old do you think is an adult?" And I didn't even question it. I said, "Well, we all like to think we're grown up when we're 16, 17. Mm-hmm. But actually, it comes into our 20s we think we're grown up,
Mm-hmm.
but we're still learning about ourselves. And then she said, so when you were 4, and that's when it hit me. It was awful in one way, but then during the session and professionally, I was able to work through, because I was with a professional, and work through. And by the time I left, I was like, oh, I started, I won't say it completely went, I started to think, how could it be my fault?
Yeah.
And even at 15, it made me think, wow, that, 14, 15, and when I say 15, just 15, it made me think that took some courage. So that's the bit of shame that I say that silence exacerbates it. So we don't want to go there. But actually, our bodies, and we talk about chronic fatigue, this is where professionally our bodies want to keep us safe. So our bodies remember what action caused us to feel shameful, and we internalize it. And so our conscious thinking and our subconscious thinking is fighting with each other. Okay, I'm not shameful, I haven't done anything wrong. Well, deep down you're still carrying it.
Yeah.
Because you've acknowledged it and you can understand it consciously, but you haven't really understood it enough for your self-conscious. And that's the work that we do by looking at evidence, because we all want evidence.
Mm-hmm. So
now if we were to look for, if we're feeling shameful, check in. What is that feeling? It feels black and horrible. Okay. And explore the feeling, not what's happened, explore the feeling. And then we look for other evidence. So we're reframing what's happening. And it's not easy to do, first of all. We've spoken about reframing before, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
And it's only then when you're able to find a voice and verbalize your feelings that suddenly it starts to tumble out. And it's like, okay. And when I say verbalize, even with journaling, and there's different ways, different exercises that I use that seem so simple, but they're simple to enable those thoughts of shame and to be expressed, but they're not simple. They really go down deep.
Yeah. I think obviously there is boys and girls, men and women, and everyone in between, all the different genders. If they've gone through similar, they will all feel shame and guilt to a certain extent, more or less, whatever, it doesn't matter. We all feel the same if we've gone through similar. How do we allow everybody to be able to express how they're feeling? And what I'm trying to do is trying to get how do we give people permission to share what they've gone through when they don't feel like they can? It's so deep, it's so shameful. They feel that if they do come out of it, they will be so judged. People will feel and think differently about them. So how do we give people permission to share when they don't feel that they can?
The very first thing we're looking to do is create for ourselves a safe space. And when I say safe space, a safe space within ourselves. So re-nurturing ourselves. So literally you feel like you're going back to your younger self inside of you, and you're trying to give some nurture. Now that nurture could be in different ways. It could be through movement. It could be through food, nurturing ourselves with good food, making sure that, nurturing ourselves with showering, nurturing ourselves with our environment. What's our bedroom look like where we're working? Now, somebody might say, that's not very practical or, very effective. Well, actually, it is. It's the first start of it, because once we start doing that, then we're showing ourselves some love. Once we start doing that, we're also becoming aware of what's happening in our body and learning different techniques such as breathing, tapping, havening, all different tools. Everybody has access to the different tools. And I will say, particularly if they're working with a professional, to guide them through. So they're learning that, first of all, to enable them slowly and surely to then find a way that they can verbalise how they feel and view from a different position. So I very much advocate colours and space. So some people might go outside and have a big piece of paper and a dark pen and write down all those feelings of shame. And they might not want to share it with anyone, and they don't have to. But then they can rip it up. They can. So that is actually the start of giving their feelings a voice. Somebody else might want to do it by screaming. So there's no words. So screaming, running, hitting, just, it doesn't actually have to be words. We know how hard it is the very first time, but you're finding an outlet for those words, an outlet for that trauma.
I think because the shame's been buried deep for many of us, and it's been layered upon and layered upon, those feelings that we have also been suppressed. So the fact that you've just shared different ways of being able to express those feelings, it's good, I think, because many people need to just get into touch with their feelings, because there's a lot of people that have expressed to us over the years that they just feel numb. They don't
Absolutely.
feel, and they've not felt. So when you do feel, you're actually healing. Yeah. So I've shared with everybody that I've been angry for a long time, and I shouldn't feel ashamed of my anger, which I have done. I felt very ashamed of how angry I've felt, but I shouldn't. So one of those layers of getting rid of shame for me as being to acknowledge that anger and to deal with that anger.
And there you go. We become fearful of what we feel.
Mm-hmm.
We can become fearful. We don't want to look at shame. I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
But by when I was saying, the different things that we can look at, the small things, if we start by the small things, we're taking things out one by one. We're not going, let's do it all, because there's no way you can do it all in one.
No.
There's no way. It's not, I wouldn't recommend it. It's not good. Each step makes a difference, but you have to take time. It's a process. It is a process.
Yeah. And I hear a lot, Beverley, as well, and it's just come clear to me right now over the years, therapy again. I'm doing therapy again. I can't believe this. Why am I in therapy again? All I ever seem to do is work on myself. And that's exactly the reason why, because you can't do it all at once. You peel the onion. You deal with what comes up.
Absolutely.
You need a breathing space, and then you come back to it and you peel another layer. So this last year for me of EMDR, when I had that massive reaction and the anger literally come out like a volcano, and I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was completely and utterly scary. And when I shared it with you, there was a bit of shame attached to that. But now it's just like, I'm so pleased I've been able to deal with that shame and guilt about the anger that I felt that was so deep rooted. It's literally off my chest, because I shared with you, I felt suffocated here. My throat kept closing up. But the fact that I've been able to get rid of that and have a rest when I went away in the new year has enabled my body just to feel lighter. But that's been decades of working on myself, in and out of therapy at different times, There's the clarity.
Absolutely. And it, wherever we are, whether we're at the beginning, and I'm going to say journey, process, journey, in our life, there is no one way that works for everybody. No. We cannot say, this is what's going to happen, 1, 2, 3. We cannot say that the same process will get the same response from everybody. What happens is, I'm a big advocate of saying, putting together a wellness toolbox. And by doing that, that means that when everything around us feels like it's falling apart and we can feel like the shame, okay, what do I need to start showing myself the evidence? So sometimes for me, one key thing is recognizing the things that I do well. You know, when I've been kind to someone else or kind to me, you know, writing it down, and then at those moments of shame, being able to use those examples to reinforce it's okay. It's okay. It's the evidence. And that's important. So I'm just watching the time, Chris, because as ever, the time has absolutely flown. Anybody listening, I hope, as always, they've taken some information out of this. Your last thoughts before we come to an end, Chris?
Whatever happened to you and whoever did it to you, they're at fault. It's not anything to do with you. If you was aroused physiologically, that's absolutely normal, and it is not something that you chose. It was a physiological reaction to something that is natural and normal, but not when it comes to child sexual abuse. It was not your fault. It never is your fault. And please put that shame back at the door of the perpetrator. It doesn't belong to you, and it's going to take you time to work through that and actually acknowledge what I'm saying is factual and true.
Absolutely, and you said that very well. And you know, the arousal part is a huge part, and that's something we don't want to leave everybody in a bad place, so we won't go further. We'll do that in another episode. But again, get it out. You know, silence exacerbates so much, and I always say that silence is the shame's best friend. That's going to be my last parting words.
Okay.
So remember, everybody, to look after yourself. You know, think about what it is that you want to get out of yourself, and maybe go for a walk, scream, write it out, rip it up, journal, whatever works for you.
Absolutely. And please, if you are in a really dire situation with your thoughts and your feelings, please call the Samaritans or any other survivors helpline out there. There's NAPAC, the Survivors Trust, the Rape Crisis, and many more. Menkind, just so many out there. Just Google them, phone up their helpline, and speak your truth when you're ready.
Absolutely. So it's goodbye from me, Beverley Ann.
And bye from me, Chris Tuck. See you next time, everyone, and thank you for listening. Please get in touch and let us know your thoughts and anything else you want us to chat about. We would love to hear from you.
And if there's any questions, remember, we can be contacted at breakingthecycletostepforward@gmail.com. We have Facebook page and Instagram. My brain went dead then. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.